Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Today, I want to do what Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics calls his COVID catch-up tag, a set of questions that encourages us to reflect a bit on the last year plus of time living in the pandemic. I've really appreciated the thoughtful answers this tag has pulled out of Roz at Scallydandling About the Books, Sonia an Enthusiastic Reader, and Steve Donahue, and I thought I would give it a try too. The first question in the tag asks when we first heard about COVID-19. I'm not certain. I have a strong memory of seeing a news report about an illness in Wuhan back in late December when my spouse and I were in South Carolina visiting my mother and brother. Now that I've looked up the dates when news stories really started getting distributed in the United States, I'm not certain my memory is correct. Because my spouse is involved in healthcare policy, it isn't impossible, but I'm not sure. I definitely heard details quite early in January. My employer at that point had a long-standing plan to visit her family in China, but canceled her plans because of the uncertainty of what was happening there. As soon as the first two cases arrived in the U.S., I started keeping very close eyes on what happened. A week or two later, at the start of the last week of February, a friend of mine told me he was hoping to go to Italy to see his sister and vacation with his spouse and their daughter. Hearing the news that cases in Italy had jumped overnight from fewer than 5 to more than 20 concerned him. He asked my husband David if he should worry. David said he suspected things would be okay, that they might even be worse in the U.S. than in Italy, given the new cases starting to pop up on the West Coast, but that it would be a good idea to keep his eye on what happened in the section of Italy our friend planned to visit. By the next day, Italy had 80 cases, and a day later, more than 150. It was clear to us then that a worldwide pandemic was coming and coming quickly. Although we weren't wearing masks yet or ordering our groceries for delivery, we were learning to push elevator buttons with our elbows and wash our hands much more thoroughly than we had before. During the first weekend of March, our college-age son flew home from Boston. We enjoyed seeing him and even went to a Shakespeare play together, the last entertainment-related thing I did in a public place. While he was home, we tracked new reports that a biotech conference seemed to have been the site of a handful of transmissions of what was then still mostly called coronavirus. The news was troubling, especially since some of the conference participants came from our son's university. By the end of the weekend, the numbers of diagnoses had increased, and it was starting to become clear that some of the people infected were already spreading the virus to other states in the country as they returned to their home states. Now, by tracing a specific genetic fingerprint, researchers suspect that 250,000 cases or more stemmed from that conference, which may have been the first American superspreader event. On the evening before his flight back to college, my son wondered if his university would temporarily shut down before he even boarded the plane. While he was excited to get back and see his friends, the idea of a slightly extended time here with us didn't feel like an enormous issue. Within days, it was far more obvious what we were dealing with, though. The call did not come, and Abe flew back to Boston on Sunday. 2 days later, the college did close, and not just for a short time. Students were told they needed to move out of their dorms completely for the rest of the school year and by the weekend. My husband flew up, rented a car, filled it with all the belongings Abe couldn't stash somewhere, and brought both our son and one of his international friends home to stay. The two of them finished their junior years online, and by the end of not just the school year, but a summer of pandemic, it was clear that Abe would not have the opportunity to move back into the dorms in the fall either, and that there would be no classes in person. He decided to take a year off instead of doing it online, and he's been able to find some fascinating work opportunities. Still, he is extraordinarily happy to hear that his university is planning to find safe ways to reopen both dorms and classrooms as much as possible this coming fall, when he'll be starting his senior year. And that brings me to the second question of the tag. How are things in your neck of the woods? What's open or not? We live right outside of Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, as people say, in Maryland. The state took the pandemic quite seriously in the beginning, although there has been a bit of a push lately to reopen everything very quickly, which many of the people in my particular neighborhood, a town sometimes called the Berkeley of the East, feel is just too fast. Of most importance to me is that the public library I use most often does not allow patrons into the library. I can put books on hold through an online system. Librarians collect them, and then they'll be delivered to a table at a small vestibule at assigned times. Although grocery stores are open, with some restrictions on how many people can enter at once or perhaps which direction people should go down particular aisles, we primarily have been ordering groceries for delivery, or once or twice for curbside pickup. Within my particular friend group, I think we fall somewhere in the middle as far as what we personally do. We have gone to a couple of small outdoor gatherings around a fire pit, but in general, David and I both work and socialize from the comfort of our home computers. At some point, David's large office will probably expect him to come back, but I suspect it will not be a huge rush for a variety of reasons. This will be our second year sharing Passover Seders with our friends over Zoom. Our big excitement is when we occasionally take a drive into the countryside a bit north of us, or through the downtown areas of D.C. sometimes. And this will probably be our second year visiting the cherry tree blossoms through car windows, instead of by walking under the branches. The third question asks what we're looking forward to reading after COVID. I don't have a specific book in mind, but I know where I want to pick out that book. I haven't been in any bookstore for more than a year, but there is plenty to read in our house, and plenty that's arrived in the mail or from the library. And I miss my favorite local spots. Still, the one I want to visit most is the Brattle Bookshop in Boston. I mentioned that my son has high hopes that plans to reopen in the autumn can in fact proceed, and if so, I am hopeful that I might be able to drive up with him and meet Steve Donahue at the bookstore, even if we still have to shout through our masks from a distance in the outdoor sale lot. Question 4. What is a book you've read in these last months, directly or indirectly, because of COVID? Well, I read quite a bit in the first few months about the so-called Spanish flu of 1918. The most interesting thing I read recently is a literary history of the era, a book called Viral Modernism that slightly recasts our vision to see modernism as an outgrowth not just of World War I, but of the experience of the flu pandemic. I mentioned it before, and I promised to talk about it here, and I'll just reiterate that I really will discuss it in a video sometime soon. Prompt 5 asks us to talk about some of the best videos we've made or seen during COVID. Like so many of you, I was overwhelmed this year, not just by the stress of the pandemic, but by the political situation in the U.S. I've especially appreciated Brian at Bookish because of the beautiful way he can balance talking about books in a thoughtful way with talking about what has been happening in our country. I'm especially impressed with his videos about the history of racial oppression in this country, those that came out during the Black Lives Matter protest during the summer. I also really love Steve Donahue's Daily Penguins with guest star Frida. So often I listened to them through my headphones after I had turned out my light to calm down before falling asleep. I'm sure that's not what Steve planned when he started the tour of his penguin shows back in January, but the stability of those videos in my life meant inordinately more in 2020 than I would have expected. And more than any particular videos, the part of BookTube I have appreciated the most during the pandemic is the deep friendships I've developed here. For years, I've called the people I've connected with in various online places my, quote, pretend friends. Yes, they always felt real in some way, but not like what I found here in Book 2. I'm sure I would have loved getting to know all of you whenever I started participating here. But those connections have seemed so important when even a neighborhood walk sometimes felt like too big a risk. Thank you all for being here. And the last question, are you going to have the vaccine? Absolutely. Due to a fairly slow rollout in our neck of the woods, none of us have received our shots yet. Some of our friends are first responders or medical providers or school teachers and the like and have been able to, but we haven't yet. Technically, my husband David could have received his vaccine already. He has a medical license and he's a government employee, and both are categories that have already been called up in our state. Because he does not see patients and because he has the ability to work completely from home, he decided to refrain from taking doses that might be able to go to healthcare providers or grocery workers or mail deliverers. But now, at this point, vaccine distribution seems far less limited. Both of us are in a category that will open up early next week. It may take a while to actually get an appointment, of course. Here's to hoping that the efforts to vaccinate people goes as smoothly and comprehensively as possible, both here in the States and also around the world. I don't think I'm going to tag anyone for this one. There is something a little uncomfortable about making this tag go viral. But I certainly encourage anyone interested to share your answers, either here or on your own channels. Thank you very much, Alan, for bringing up this conversation. It's been a wild year for all of us. I am very hopeful that we'll be able to move toward a life that's a bit more open, even if we still have to deal with some adjustments, and even if we have to make some permanent changes. Thanks for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon, perhaps even in person.